What's up, humans? Welcome to a new Psicoactivo episode. Dr. Celestino Piotti has been in contact with me constantly after our first interview. I have communicated some of the doubts and questions that emerge from his interview because apparently there are some scientists who believe that the interview we made initially was very vague, which I don't agree with. But since this llama skull hypothesis has been so controversial, and there seems to be a group of scientists who apparently did studies on samples, which we don't know yet if they're samples from real bodies or from constructed bodies, because both exist. I repeat, both exist. I reached out to Dr. Piotti to ask him if he could be gracious enough to give us a detailed explanation of the angles he measured in those 60 centimeters bodies. So he did that. We were showing the drawings that he gave us of the x-rays, and he was very thorough in his explanation. During the first 40 minutes of this talk, round two, he explained a little bit of context of human evolution and how he came up with a lot of this. We didn't speak about the mummies during this time, but after, he got into detail also about the M types that Professor Stephen Brown talks about, which is Maria, Montserrat, Sebastian, and the other little kid. And he explains thoroughly why he believes and that the skulls were not elongated artificially post-mortem, and he explains also why he believes that these tridactyl feet and hands were not artificially made. I explained to him that there were findings from the scientists that they found 5 different tendons. He talks to me about why he believes this is not the case as well. And he gives me an example of how someone can easily claim that these are llama skulls with another different skull, and why these claims can be easily made without any real proof. Because let's remember that none of the scientists who have talked about these llama skull hypothesis and the studies that they made with the samples that I believe are not from the real bodies, why none of these scientists have studied the bodies in person. So they really have no basis to claim what they're claiming. Until they are able to visit the bodies in person and study them in person, I would advise them to please refrain from making any sort of claim about these llama skulls. The only way that you can make these claims is after you get to examine the bodies in person. Please get that through your skull, okay? So this is round 2 between me and Dr. Celestino Piotti for Psicoactivo. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you like the content you see, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Everything helps so we can keep this channel growing. We're closing in on 3,000 subscribers. We're about over 200 subscribers away from that. So please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I can see that almost 70% of you who watch the videos are not subscribed, so please subscribe. If you want to support the channel in any other way, I'm going to leave a couple of links in the description. One is of Buy Me a Coffee, another one is of PayPal. Any donations you make to the channel will go directly to more AI stuff so we can keep translating, and more tools that are helping the channel grow. So without further ado, this is Dr. Celestino Piotti for the second time for Psicoactivo. Thank you. What's up, humans? Welcome to a new episode of Psicoactivo. Today we have round 2 with Dr. Celestino Adolfo Piotti. Welcome, doctor. How are you doing? What about in Argentina?
How are you, sir? It is a pleasure to meet again through this medium. How am I in Argentina? Well, we are cold, passing a small polar waves. A cloudy day that looks like it may rain after a long time. Well, they are quite unstable, and it has been a different winter than the others. Stronger, colder, anyway, I see.
Who do I have back here?
Yes, it's Darwin.
Yes, your nemesis. We're going to get one made of you and make a stuffed animal of you, and we're going to put him over there next to Darwin so that.
He's going to have to be beardless.
Yes, of course. Very good. Okay, so, well, first of all, I want to thank you for the first interview you gave us because you had a pretty good reaction with the people. The only ones he did not have a good reaction with were skeptical scientists. And unfortunately, for those who speak English, I feel that there is a certain loss within the language, isn't there? And there are many of them who had more questions about everything we talked about in the first interview. And I tell you a little bit about how the context is. There is a group of English-speaking scientists who are investigating samples and X-rays and photos of the bodies, the small 60 centimeters bodies and the large bodies like Maria and Montserrat. And this group that did not want to reveal their identity, which I honestly do not like because you, Dr. Rangel, Dr. Salce, the biologist Jose de la Cruz Rios, all of you put your name, you are putting your face forward, and to a certain extent you are risking your reputation with this type of research. And it doesn't seem fair to me that the English-speaking people who are scientists don't want to show their faces and want to do everything in secret, and it doesn't look good. Then these people came out with conclusions that they took their own samples. According to them, I don't know if they are samples of real bodies. And they came out with the conclusion that the 60 centimeters ones have flame heads, all of them. And that the two of the Maria and Montserrat type are human but have modifications in the skull that are typical of the Nazca culture and have two fingers that were removed because there is a gentleman or one of these scientists who, according to him, discovered that they have 5 tendons in their hands. So these are the two things that I mainly want to know, if you can help me clarify. And then you and I were also talking, because you already proposed to me to give us a little more detailed explanation of what you studied for the people and also for these people, because I don't want there to be division. I want us all to be on the same page, and I think you can help us do that. What do you think?
Well, of course. You will gradually remind me of the topics we are going to expand, plus what I'm going to show you. Look, I think there are a number of factors beyond the control of individuals that make all types of research difficult. In the old days, when the Anthropological Society of Paris appeared with Broca, who founded it in 1860-50, there was the problem that there was very little communication between countries, and there was a long delay. And all the advances that were produced, here it's the other way around. Here, on the one hand, we go fast, like through this Zoom medium that we are talking about, but on the other hand, there is the lack of language, or the English language and the Spanish language, or even the different culture of the scientists of each country, isn't it? Well, it's not the same to talk maybe with a first world scientist, one third world scientist. A first world scientist is used to dealing with ultra-modern technology, and a third world scientist measures bones with a piece of wire. In the long run, the functions are the same, but, well, there are a series of factors, human factors, social factors, factors of the same types of societies and cultures that are produced. I have a little experience, let's say not a happy experience, with this kind of things and discussions, because here in Argentina, for example, when I did my thesis, the same judges of my thesis, well, I had to make an effort to not fight sometimes and argue with them. Look, I had to pass 3 juries. First, my thesis director, who was accompanied by 2 other juries appointed by the medical school, then other juries, and a third one. When I already deserted the thesis, at the end, well, there must have been 12, 13, 15 physicians sworn in total, right? More or less. For example, when the person who is called the sponsor of my thesis here, the one who directed my thesis, was not a physical anthropologist. Mine is the first thesis to appear in medicine in the Faculty of Medicine of Argentina on the subject of anthropology and medical physics. So, for example, I tell you a passage. Once we were meeting in those meetings every several months, 2 or 3 months, which are a requirement of the academic regulations requested by the faculty to then finish in the thesis. Quite a formality, isn't it? Because I had it done ready 27 years ago. Well, the headmaster tells me when I talk about evolution, I said one word, the evolution of man. It caught my attention, and he tells me not to talk about the word evolution. Why? I tell him. Because they will believe that you are a Darwinist. Look at the concept. He had an ancient concept, or archaic, or older than mine, where he thought it was almost a sin to talk about evolution, to be an evolutionist. And I am not Darwin's because I don't even follow him, because I have even made my theory of Darwin's evolution opposite to what Darwin says. Yet this physician did not realize it, or did not have it in mind at the time. So I answered him, well, okay, I tell him, I listen to your advice, but remember that I say the word evolution, which means growth. It means going towards something else. He didn't know how to answer me at all. And look at the way things are. Then I will finish. I am going to tell it now. And with the respect that one owes to the professors I have had, but they had no idea about my thesis. And I had to duck my head several times and say, who did I mess with? Because they are doctors who were in another specialty, but they knew nothing about these. So in spite of that, I was honored with the thesis. I was a finalist for the 2001 School of Medicine Award. Later it was decided that another doctor won, but because we had been tied, half of the judges were in favor of me and the other half in favor of the other doctor, and none of them wanted to let the other one win. So it was going to be a tie, let's say permanent. Then they had to decide to break the tie simply by seeing which of the two doctors had proposed topics prior to those of the thesis abroad. And I had not proposed them, and the other one had. Then the other won. See why he wins, right? Now, when the year 2001 has already passed, and in 2003, I want to found the specialty of anthropology and medical physical in Argentina, which did not exist. It was a tremendous struggle where the doctors themselves turned around and denied me everything. It was a barbaric contradiction. Everyone said no, that this could not be, that they did not like it anymore. Well, and that is where a series of personal and cultural factors come into play, or medical training, or the level of where they are, and people's fears, sometimes fear and jealousy. And to think that maybe with a new specialty, they might think that theirs would remain apart, or that they would remain in the shadows of this new one, right? There was a rector who I do not know of the day I find him, the maximum rector of the National University of Cordoba, later, who did not want to accompany me in my claims, and who, for example, made a specialty on medical informatics, which is very useful in medicine. It is a very good advance, but it is also useful in another science, that is, in a specific science of the physician. And you are not going to be a better doctor because you are a computer scientist or not. And yet they deny a specialty like this, that this specialty complements all medical specialties. I taught 11 years as a professor in this subject to psychiatric doctors. So what does the scar have to do with it? However, I gave them 11 years and they were performing at the end of the course. Well, so then if one is going to think about all of these things, I think they are normal. I have lived them in a world where in a university that is one of the main universities, if not the best in the country, one of the first, the pride of Argentina, is the National University of Cordoba. But unfortunately, not all the people who manage it in all its times are with purely scientific thinking, but many times political, and they are defending positions, and that from the scientific part, maybe they did not have to be there. So the political part does allow them. And on the other hand, let's say many people, instead of studying all their lives, which costs a lot, and it is necessary to have a lot of will, and to remove a series of deprivations of other things to be able to study, many people graduate, and instead of studying, they stand in a place in the faculty and are permanently standing, just making their presence known to the professor. So the years go by, and then when the professor retires, he says, who do we put in? And let's put so-and-so, because this gentleman has been standing here for 30 years, at least watching, right? So that's how they think they are. Charges that are simply politics as usual, and that do not always demonstrate the scientific capacity of individuals. And that's where the complaints come from later, when we do poorly in medical training. So when I see these things that are going to happen, imagine if we put what I am telling you in the context of these mummies, which for me is one of the most important discoveries of the 20th and 21st century, much more than those I have experienced in my profession. There will be a series of discussions and misunderstandings among scientists that are normal and that lead to all that fear, that stress caused by the fear of losing the place they have or of not being considered in one way or another. So and well, and it is a human fear that there is. The human being is the owner of that.
And this is a phenomenon that happens all over the world. not only in your country, that there are people who are not prepared. They get to high positions and try to protect their position so that any kind of new paradigm that comes that clashes with their interests, they do their best so that it does not become the new thing, right? The new law.
Of course, well, I think it happens all over the world, but in Argentina it happened and it happens. And I am very critical of these things. Look, there are deans that I am capable of cutting off their salute because I presented in one of the many preparations in my thesis, The Woman of Loreto, which is a book that I published just before when I was in Mexico, which talks about the oblique perforation and all these things, and talks about the heritage of the Piteco towards us, unique in Argentina. The subject had never been dealt with before, and they had it in the Pedro Ares Museum, the famous museum of the hospital clinic in Cordoba, for 6 years. And then there appeared a group of people who called themselves descendants of our aborigines, who no longer exist here, but they call themselves that. And they said, no, and if these are our ancestors, then they cannot be exposed. Either he buries them or he gives them to us so that we bury them according to the right of the Comechingones here, or else they keep them hidden. And to top it off, the dean or the rector at the time did not dare to discriminate against scientific methods, preferring not to have problems. Why? Because although he was an ancestor of ours, it is also my thesis. So if I donate my thesis to the faculty, it must be respected. They accepted it. Already a series of problems. What I summarize is the following. That specimen at this moment is lying in a kind of basement, a kind of totally unhygienic piece, hidden in the Pedro Ara Museum. And nobody wants to show it because an illiterate comes, a person who has no knowledge comes, and says they are our descendants from 3,000 years ago, therefore we should not touch them. So then science stops. And if all those people knew that I could tell them how our ancestors were, how they had the longest forearm, all those things, it would make them proud if they called themselves descendants. They are pseudo-descendants. But it would even make them proud to say, well, we are descendants of a highly evolved human lineage, but they cannot even see that. So what do? Instead of fighting, which I don't have time for because I have to continue studying, I try to see all those who think differently from what I think as a normal thing. And I even try, look what I am going to tell them. I am able to give them my scientific weapons so that they can see them and try to respond with another scientific method. In other words, I can help them to make an applied scientific method, as medicine says, so that they can compare it with ours. It's like I'm giving my weapons to the enemy, in quotation marks, because they are not enemies. Well, even that I am capable of doing. Why? Because I believe that as long as one does research and does it in good faith and is decent in medical research as a doctor should be, one should not be afraid of anything and should be able to listen to everything that others say. And I repeat, I offer my scientific arguments to those who think differently as if they were my weapons, which I give to them so that they can use them and they can achieve a proper research in terms of putting into practice the scientific method in medicine. I, for example, have brought you here. Do you see it there?
Yes.
It is the skull of a Pithekus. No, sorry, it is not a Piteco. It is a much more modern monkey, but monkeys of what are called monkeys of forgiveness, monkeys of the New World. The monkeys of the New World are not our ancestors, but they are these little monkeys that have appeared especially in South America at some time, and that still exist, which are called howler monkeys, for example. Some of them are short monkeys, 30 centimeters more or less. That is to say that this one is not ancient. But I used it to differentiate it from the first world monkeys, which are orangutan, chimpanzee, and gorilla, of which they have that relationship with us in the ancestor of ours. In this case, these are not, shall we say, not our ancestors, but I brought it for something especially. Well, there I show you the little face. I had all those things, but if I'm going to turn it around, I show the face of the Austin Prudence that they say of Nazca. If I make a hole here with two big eyes and the little mouth at the bottom, it almost looks like the back of the skull of a llama. And the skull of the llama, which skeptics says that they disfigured the skull of the occipital leg of the llama and made the face of this little Nazca being. And if I put it in a grinder, I might get it. I don't know if it's noticeable. I get a little bit there too.
Yes, it is similar as well.
Of course, disfiguring his nose will give me the skull up to here, at least the skull of these Nazca beings. So with that criteria, I can also invent anything. And yet it's a monkey. No matter what, it is a monkey. The occipital foramen, the foramen magnum here, is on the side. In man it is on the bottom, and in man it is on the side because they walk on all fours like a dog, isn't it? Then the cervical spine goes this way. So if I say it again, it looks like I can make two big eyes on top and close the little mouth at the bottom, the nose, and put a little closed mouth here. And I can also say that and use a monkey. These are howler monkeys from the northern area of Argentina, from Chaco, border with Paraguay, with Brazil. There may also be in Peru, even nearby, in the Peruvian Amazon. So you can also say that they invented at that time, or now they made a fraud using the monkey's head. You know what I mean? In other words, there are plenty of arguments to invent, but for me, it is not enough. That is why when you send me the other shorter video, where they video recorded how they grind the head of the llama or skulls to make these Nazca being, well, here I also give them an element to say that they can also do it for this. However, I do not believe that it is so. So I am giving them weapons for them to answer. And let's see, I give you an example. Let's see, use this occipital of this monkey. Let's see if you also find there a fraud for the Nazca mummies. Let's speak clearly. Let's put the hypothesis on the table. And if I put it on the table, I am calm, because I don't have believed this. I'm speaking scientifically in a decent way. So this, I brought it up especially as to, let's say, give the viewer an idea, which is not a matter of talking with respect to what is being talked about, those llama proteins that you say have been detected. Well, and those have been detected, and how was it just now? How is it that it just happened? I have my doubts because, well, they have not presented a study that says, let's see, the proteins, an electrophoresis, or however they want to use it to see proteins and amino acids, compare with llamas or whatever. And, well, there are studies that are simpler. However, that is as far as they go. But in the meantime, with what we're going to talk about now, but I get to talk about the measurements of these short people. And what are the skeptics going to tell me? Is it possible that from this skull or llama, is it possible that I could later put all the measurements of the 60 centimeters and they would match? Do you think it's easy?
I really don't think so.
Me neither. I have measured all of them. And to top it off, as I repeated, I told you that time in the first interview, not only do they give me similar measurements, but they give me similar measurements close to each other. Do you think that if I measure the inside of the back of the skull here and pretend that the face is located here, I will get the sella turcica below? I will get the hormonal part, the balance part, all those things? If the skull is in reverse and when I do all those endocranial measurements, will it match? What does it mean? That I am a super scientist who matches human measurements to animal measurements. I think it also seems to me that, well, it depends on the courage of each one to speak.
Yes, besides, I think it is one of the reasons that these scientists do not want to show their faces. I think that from the very beginning, that is why it is difficult to trust what they say, because as I told you, there are already about 50 Latin American scientists who have put their names, have put their faces, and have been doing serious scientific work for the last 7 years. And these people are new and they are repeating many of the things that were already talked about in 2017, 2018, and already proven to not be it. But talking to Joao Mantilla, I noticed a certain, frustration, because he was repeating. They are repeating many things that he already went through, that he already explained 20,000 times. And unfortunately, that's how it has to be because of the language problem more than anything else. And just this year, apart from last year, the English-speaking scientific community has just started to turn around. So I think it is going to take a little bit of time. But what we are doing now with you, I think it can also help a lot to clear things up.
Look, let's do a little bit of history so that we are not afraid of what one lives. Because you see, human beings have the problem that since they live a certain time after they die, and then a new generation comes along, they do not remember what happened before, and they do not know it. When this revolution in medical physical anthropology took place in France, 1850 to 60, every time something was discovered, it took months to be communicated to the rest of the scientific society due to the lack of rapid communication. But does it mean that as long as he was doing things right, the other was doing them wrong? Well, and that gave discussions one series of things, but in the long run, all these issues were becoming clearer. What one says out there, he uses a very common phrase that says, no courage, no war. Well, I don't think there are any here. To see it from that point of view, even though some people may be half-hearted and speak things without thinking, without analyzing them much, they should be left alone because they have the right to do so. But I think you have to be patient. It is a phenomenon that I know it has now happened with the mummies, so it's important. And that this is going to take a long time for everyone to realize. And that's because the man is living life very selfishly, as we had talked about in the other interview, isn't it? Where man thinks he is outside the realms of the earth, he thinks he owns it all. I think, well, I'll leave you to it. Let them speak because, well, I also have elements to say what is going on. So, and I repeat, I know I offer them for you to use. I have no problem. So, well, I had written down some issues here so as not to forget them. For example, in Argentina, a very important phenomenon happened at the time of an 1800s, where one of our scientists, Florentino Meghino, was the one who proposed that man was born in America, and from there he had evolved towards the rest of the world. In other words, a theory opposed to the African theory, which we know is the most convenient theory for us. Well, although this Florentino Meghino here in Argentina is a wise man for all of us, he was not a doctor, he was a biologist and an anthropologist at that time. He used several techniques of several sciences together. And, well, he dies in 1911. It is said that he even sold the fossils that he found. He sold them abroad to have money, to be able to continue researching because nobody did. I supported him. The truth is that in spite of all the complaints and in spite of the fact that he wants to prove that man was born for the first time in America, in Patagonia, from a little monkey one tall. And the Patagonian homunculi, well, later with the years you can see in that skull, that monkey was just a part of the skull. You can see that it is not true, but that skull belonged to an aborigine. Then his theory is discarded and is not taken into account. That is, it is believed that then, believe me, everyone says that he was not right in his theory. But when you go to Harvard or go to the great universities, I had the opportunity to be at Columbia, at New York University, and in the great museums and libraries, when you study all the precursors of physical anthropology. In between is the name of Florentino Meghino. So in spite of all the mistakes made by this individual, who for us is a source of pride, he is the only one we had here in Argentina. He is among the best. And why? Because science progresses not only by getting things right, but also by making mistakes. Because the error serves as a stepping stone for another scientist to step on that error, modify it, and evolve science. Therefore, both in the case I am going to speak for the first time about me, both in my case modestly, what I propose in my studies, and the others who are in the English language, and who propose apparently opposite things, or those who think differently. We are all doing science. Each one is putting one more step for the other one to step on there and try to progress things. Science is not used. Science was not formed on the basis of successes. It was formed on the basis of a lot of mistakes and things that were wrong, because that is what scientific discussion and the application of this scientific method gives. Therefore, I would like, on the other hand, to invite them to propose that these steps of scientific proposals be valid for everyone. And not just say, well, such and such protein is similar to that of the other, well, but something else should follow. Because that is one thing that is just a sign that it can to do. I don't want to give my opinion on that because I don't know what methods they have used, but in exchange for that, there are several methods that so far have shown me that this is not the case. Well, if you want, I think the most important thing we can do is to start talking well, to talk about these mummies. And let's leave aside all these people who are skeptical. Because we are all imperfect beings, then let's give everyone time to go. Fitting a little bit into our daily lives to see where our humanity is going in the future, isn't it? In the meantime, let's keep talking a little more about the mummies. For example, when I studied Maria and Montserrat, I did it by means of X-rays or those color tomographies that go in motion, right? That I got them from the internet, and at times the ones they sent me were too heavy for the computer, and it was difficult for me to open them, but I opened one every other time. Well, I did what I could, but let's start with the dental, for example. Montserrat has extremely well-maintained teeth and is not missing any teeth. And Maria has totally neglected opposing dentition. If God allows me, I am going to show you. Give me 1 minute. Yeah. Well, it turns out that in the case of Montserrat, I applied some Piotti indexes, which is the index that bears my name. Why? There is a whole little medical history to be made of this. When a person is standing still to measure his height, he is not measured with a tape measure attached to the wall. That is what everyone commonly measures, but it is inaccurate. But if you want to measure a person with the state as fairly as possible of the size that person has, for example, in a court case where you have to identify a film where an individual committing a crime and you can't see his face, you can see his height, then you say, well, let's see how tall he was. The height must be taken out very well because it can compromise one or the other. Well, then the first thing to do is to put the Frankfurt plane horizontal on the skull. The Frankfurt plane is a plane that passes through the skull from the side. The skull, the lateral norm, passes through the infraorbital point and then continues through the upper part of the external auditory canal, which is called the porion. The Frankfurt plane then passes to this horizontal level. It must be horizontal when you have a single skull and you put it horizontal with one of those bubble levels of the masons of the construction industry. Well, it turns out that that's where you can make the plan of Frankfurt. Well, but the Frankfurt plane is useful when the person is still. But when the person walks, the Frankfurt plane already, at least in my method, I made it invalid. Note that the Frankfurt plane was created in 1900 at the Frankfurt Convention so that all skulls in the world would be measured in the same way. At this time that I am living, I invalidated it because walking does not serve me. Why? Because it is necessary to see what plane of dental wear the person's dentition has, especially the dental wear that may be present in the lower jaw.
Is this Maria's? Sorry?
Yes?
You can see it there.
Yes, Maria's. And here, later, when you take the image, I will show you a jawbone that I brought similar to Mary's so that you can see it live. Here, Liv. Well, there Maria shows that she has a disorganization. Let's say a bad dentition in the lower jaw. What I see is that the alveoli of the molars and premolars in the lower jaw have been resorbed. And I had also seen it before in the X-ray that you show me. The alveoli of the molars and premolars in the lower jaw have been resorbed. This was due to the fact that Mario had a tooth loss during his lifetime, and then the hole in the alveolus where the tooth was implanted remained. But over the years, with the passage of many years, this orifice of the alveoli is reabsorbed and a completely smooth bone remains there. This is a sign of old age because this phenomenon takes many years to occur in a living person. Therefore, he lost in life very early, young, he lost his teeth, and after many years the alveoli resolved. It is possible that Maria did not live more than 30, 40 years because at that time in Nazca, women lived that life, that kind of life. Amerindians at that time were just that. So this time was useful to reabsorb the tooth sockets. So this is already a sign of the evolution of Maria's teeth. Her teeth are very poorly cared for, possibly because they were fed a lot of cereals, because at that time the nomadic era had already been abandoned and it was the sedentary era, incipient farmer or more developed farmer, where instead of hunting and feeding on proteins, they fed a lot on the cereals that they harvested. So those cereals are the ones that make the teeth change. The teeth of a nomadic hunter are not the same as the teeth of a Zweitersindane. From a sedentary person, a farmer, the farmer has an increase of glucose and carbohydrates that cause dental cavities and spoil them. Gingivitis, gums are lowered, and then there are infections added to the teeth that cause them to be lost faster than in the nomadic hunter. So Mary has a sign of that type of teeth. She has eaten very hard food, very little elaborated food, and then maybe even used the jaw as for a tool like a pincer or a vise to work or carve certain elements of daily life. Utensils. Well, that's the case with her. But Montserrat's case is quite the opposite. Montserrat's case has not lost. I show you here. In the case of Maria, look, I brought one. This is an Amerindian from Argentina, from Cordoba, where I show here in this part. Let's see. I don't know if you can see. The absorptions of the alveoli are not, they are not. There are the hollows of the alveoli. There's Zweitausendane. Yes, where it has been inserted, in this case, the premolars. Well, this is a case where he dies before those orifices close. That is, he dies early with respect to tooth loss. In the case of Montserrat, she lives longer and has time to close those alveoli. This indicates that Montserrat Zweitosendain had a life more like an aristocrat or something, or... Yes, okay. From the case of Montserrat, I bring you this other case. This is the other extreme of Montserrat. another extreme with respect to Montserrat. If you put it in profile, you will see how, if you put a piece of paper up here, it is all a single horizontal plane. There are no dental domes that protrude a little bit upwards. Excuse the expression, one intermediate valley that the teeth have when they have not been worn down. In this case, it is an individual that used his teeth as pincers, so he wore all of this down in a single plane. He broke the dental domes, but he does it in such a way. And look at how prehistoric survival is. He does it in such a way that he gives the teeth time to grow or develop secondary dentin. This is what you see here. This is what you see here, a secondary dentin, which is the one that covers the wear of the dental domes, so that germs do not enter and the tooth is not spoiled and itchy. So it means that at that time when man had no elements, let's say, to work with as we have now as a tool, he used his mouth to hold elements, make an arrow, bite, even workshop a stone for the tip of a projectile, whatever. But he was helped by nature, because if we do what they did, our teeth break, they are weaker. On the other hand, instead of breaking, the tooth was given time to make a secondary dentin that seals the tooth from above. Here I have another similar example where you see, look at the profile of all the teeth at the same height. They have all been worn like this at the same height. And where also the secondary dentin, which is darker above the tooth, the yellowish darker part, is the one that makes the whole dentin close so that it persists. Well, but Montserrat's case did not come to this case. Why? Because when she ate soft processed food, she did not manage to wear down her teeth in this way. In other words, she has teeth almost like the ones we have now, with all the domes of the chewing part intact. Well, that shows that he has been a cared-for person, younger, of course, cared for, where he has not had a suffering, because this is a suffering in the long run. One has good teeth, but it is a suffering, let's say, to live that way, at least for the people of our time. Another important thing I want to show you is that here in the back, this space that I turn upside down, this space is a diastema. It is called diastema zweitausendein. This diastema means that here it could give room for the growth of the fourth molar, and the fourth molar is a sign that has also appeared in a very primitive period where man is adapting. The monkey did not have a fourth molar, but the very primitive man at times has had it to have more teeth to chew and to use it for tools or simply for food. How critical it must have been to feed him, who needed to have everything complete, more teeth to be able to feed himself more. Well, then as we evolve to the area, to the present, Zweitausendein disappears. Looks like third molar. Earlier I gave you a skull of the man from the island that is indicated with a pen that has a fourth molar. Well, I got to see so far in my life a fourth molar on only one side of the jaw. The upper jaw was, in this case, I have never encountered a person who has all four fourth molars, two up, two down. Hopefully it is very difficult to find. Well, but as we evolve to the present, the fourth molar disappears, but this space remains, which is the diastema. This space is the diastema behind the third molar. Nowadays, due to the soft and elaborated food that we do not chew anything, it disappears up to the third molar. And there are children who are born now and have nothing more than the second molar, and the third one they keep up there, hidden in the maxilla or below, and it never erupts outwards. Sometimes it bothers and has to be removed because it pushes and twists the entire denture. They took it away from me, in fact. Well, then that is an evolution to modernism. Note, an example of evolution to modernism. Why? Because we eat unprocessed food, our teeth are weak. Why? They itch, they get dirty, they break, we don't need them. So let's say that it is a sign that is changing, because the survival it had before man is no longer necessary, isn't it? Well, there is an index that later I will talk about an index about all these things, how they appear according to the genes and all that. So what do I mean by this? That there we have then a difference between Montserrat and Maria in terms of dentition. But another thing I want to say, Maria, for me, she took the food with her hands and did not use any utensils. And here's what I want to tell you. I also have an index where I propose that use and of the three eating utensils, knife, fork, and spoon, the only one that deforms the teeth, especially of the lower jaw, is the fork. The person who takes the fork with the left hand to eat, then takes the food to the mouth and then bites and pulls it to the side to take it out and spends. Then it makes the dentition wear here on the incisors of the lower jaw inclined to the left. If you take the fork with your right and the knife with your left, it will be someone who is not right-handed. Then it's ocios. It will pull to the other side when it makes the movement to remove the food from the fork. Then it will wear the incisors to the other side. Well, in Maria's case, there is no wear on either side, so I believe that the fork does not wear forward like this, so I don't know if there was a fork or not at that time, or a spoon, material or metal or stone or wood, but it seems to me that Mary ate with her hand. Okay, let's go back to that wear and tear that I just told you, that the fork is worn to the side. If we go back to the size I told you before, where the Frankfurt plane had to be horizontal on the standing size of the person to measure it well. When the person walks, the flask plane is no longer useful, it moves. And do you know which one prevails as an intention of wanting to put it horizontal? The plane, the twisted or untwisted plane of the jaw, the twisted or untwisted plane of the lower jaw, whether or not it has wear on the person. So, if the person eats and handles the fork with the left hand and wears to the left the incisors of the lower jaw when he walks, he does not walk straight because he walks trying to twist that inclination and make it horizontal. Then unconsciously the person may twist to walk for a cost, and we raise one shoulder than the other or imperceptible way, so you have to be accustomed to see it. And why does it do so? Because it unconsciously tries to make the wear of the lower jaw, which is twisted to one side, become horizontal again. Notice how the same bipedestation of the person makes that unconsciously. It will be at vulva level, or I do not know, well, a complex mechanism, USAN, makes that the individual stands upright in the parts of the skull and face where he has worn something out of the normal level. That is the food index that bears my name. I have proposed this many times for forensic medicine and for the identification of the person, the way they walk, their height, and all those things. So in the case of Maria de Montserrat, I estimate that she was even hand-fed. Can you speculate on that? Okay, well, let me just go on this. Does it therefore denote the difference in classes between the two? Isn't that what we are trying to explain? I think so. Yes. Maybe I don't like to talk about classes, but it is possible that more so at that time when there were the chiefs or the lords of the different tribes, different ethnic groups. Isn't it true? There were townspeople and people higher up who had their different level. I estimated that I know, at least in the currents. Notice that she belongs, Maria, to the stream of the Fourth American population stream, for me, which is a stream that comes by canoeros from the Pacific Ocean. They are the settlement currents of the superior cultures, Aztecs, Mayas, Incas, aren't they? Which were the last ones. Listen, but I wanted to ask you something specific to what you are telling me, because there are several Latin American scientists who have said that the skulls of Maria, Montserrat, Sebastian, and the other child are 30% larger than the skulls of humans at that time, and this makes them say to many of these scientists that these beings were not a 100% human. They had this then. What do you think about this? And here we can also include the supposed deformation of the skulls at once. Undoubtedly for me, but I say a little bit the same as they do, but for another reason. For me, Maria and Montserrat belong to the Somo loin that I said, and they have unknown genetics, which for me is not unknown, but of being previous. It has monkey genetics and it has Homo sapiens genetics, but all that is characteristic of Homo of all times. So I do not rely so much on the size of the skull, although logically the size of the skull stands out. For example, if I am going to see the size of the skull of Montserrat or Maria, I also have to catalog them first. I would have to measure them, but without measuring, isn't it? Which is a risk, but without mathematically measuring them, I could catalog them within the skulls of the Pampas, which are of the first American population stream that came walking through the Bering Strait, 2009, and that are the only population streams that made that type of migration by land. Then follows the second, third, and fourth currents, which are by canoeing, many after them from the first 2009 stream. So if I look at it, if I go by the shape of the skull of both, I would have to say, well, surely they are ample, but nevertheless, I think they are also ample. The pandids are brachycephalic. The pandids are round-headed. They are not dolichocephalic like the elongated head of the pamphid. However, they have an elongated skull of the pamphid. Well, for me, the explanation, I give mine, I respect the others, but mine is the following, that they occur at that time in Nazca or Palpa, or in the area of the Nazca Desert, There is this phenomenon of awakening of dormant genes of man that he already has, and that being in a period of involution of the human evolutionary chain, it does not happen as it happened in all other human species, but it happens in an anarchic way, typical of all living species, at least known on Earth. It does not happen as it happened in all other human species, but it happens in an anarchic way, typical of all living species, at least known on Earth, where when they are about to change and evolve, an anarchy occurs because there is an awakening of genes and hereditary elements that are normally dormant, because they were not needed. Note that I recognize, for me modestly, genes that are transmitted hereditarily from father and son. They are the active genes, let's say. Then genes that are recessive, which are transmitted in distant generations, then for me there are other genes that are only passed on once or twice and in some specific cases, and then they disappear forever. And other types of genes that will never be passed on. If here we see which one corresponds to Maria, and well, she has the first, second, and third molars. She has a mixture of all of them, for example, the fourth molar. It would be a way to pass on genes a few times, and then it disappears because not everyone had that. And then the transmission is not recessive, it is more than recessive. It appears anarchically over time, and perhaps when it appears, it is no longer used. Then not only that, but for example, we can also speculate on the increase of rods in the retina of the eyes. You said that in primitive times they were of greater number of rods in the retina than cones, because rods are for night vision and cones are for day vision. And the cones are at the back of the retina and the rods are at the sides of the retina. That's why when you look at night, 2009, forward, a small light, you see it better with the sides of the eye than with the front of the eye because the rods are on the sides. Well, it is speculated that also in prehistoric times man had a greater development or quantity of canes, more to be able to see a little more in the dark than before. Well, those things that are then transmitted and evolve, they would also be those types of genes that appear once and then don't appear anymore as well, wouldn't they? Yes, and there are others as well. And all that dark skin, white skin, I think I said once before that a person in Africa had black skin because there was too much sun. But if that person goes to live in Alaska, where there is little sun and a lot of cold, and his descendants are still going to be black-skinned, well, those are genes that, let's say, are no longer useful. They have appeared, and well, then they are sometimes maintained. I have written down several examples of the same, of all this. Now, returning to the subject of the skull of Mary and Montserrat, for me there is explainable anarchy, because before disappearing, for me, the last traces of Homo, of the age of man, there has been a series of anarchy. For example, if we took 30% from Simon Sarah, you can tell me if you remember, if I said it the other time, because I do not remember, and I get mixed up if I spoke or not, so as not to repeat things. For example, if we remove 30% of Mary's cranial volume, she looks like a pithecus or a monkey, because she has a very large head. Evolution says that the skull grows and the head gets smaller. That is the law of man. And in the reverse monkey, the skull shrinks and the head enlarges. One of the impediments to the monkey's upright walking was that it weighed the head forward. Well then, one thing I don't understand either when they say that they have measured the Ukrainian volumes, you and the mummies. Maybe they have some sophisticated method or some computerized method to measure the cranial volume. For me, being a doctor from Argentina who is used to measuring things the old-fashioned way, for me the simplest and safest way to measure the volume in Ukraine, which is very difficult because I am indoors on a regular basis, is to fill the skull with ammunition, cover all the holes so that none comes out, fill it up to the top, and then empty it into a bag with the measurements and see what volume it has. Well, that's the old method that I still use because it's safer. Then, for me, and measuring face volume is almost impossible for me. That's why I hear some people who say, well, I won't say anything, well, it's fine. If I manage to measure it, I don't dare because I know I'm going to make a mistake. So I tell you again, the fact that she has a bigger skull is because for me there has been an anarchy where Maria and Montserrat should have a big skull and a small head. For example, Montserrat has the glabella in the part here called glabella, very diffuse, elusive characteristic of women. The man has it more marked, along with the superciliary arches of the man are more marked than the woman, and then has small gravity. This means that Maria's frontal breasts are small, but she has large maxillary breasts. Why does he have large maxillary sinuses? Because it has a large face and because the face is growing anarchically. Maybe they would have influenced even the voice that she has, the resonance of the voice, right? Well, so for me, I see it that way. That way, these are human epochs where genetic anarchy occurs, where things do not coincide. So if I let myself be carried away by what has to be in the classic, there is something strange it can't be. Human beings are not normally like this. Let's see. I'm trying not to forget any of these things. For example, Maria walked well upright. She has had no problems in terms of the way she walks, that is, the body, the way she stands. Montserrat walked with a forward kyphosis 2009.
It was his turn to see. It was his turn to see the x-rays of the pregnant woman. I think it was Montserrat. Yes, it is true that one of the fetuses has tridactyly.
Well, but going back to this topic, it turns out that in Maria's case, she has a deformed dorsal vertebra number 12. The vertebrae are, I have not brought vertebrae here, but the vertebrae are usually cylindrical and the anterior face is vertical, equal to the posterior face, more or less. Therefore, they are cylindrical on both sides, but Mary has a vertebra that has less height on the anterior side than on the posterior side. Why? As it has the shape of a wedge.
There is the picture, look.
Yes, I can't detect Maria's vertebra there. I can't see it because it is half rotated. Well, but what I want to tell you, I don't think this is acquired in life, in my opinion, because it implies a use and wear and tear, not only of the vertebrae, but of the vertebrae above and below. Of those here, only one vertebra is worn, the others are normal. Then one starts to think if it is not even a small genetic inheritance of those genes that appear only once in a lifetime, or very few that are much more special than the recessive genes that you inherited from your ancestors. And it is not a wear and tear proper to the function that she has had in walking or moving the spine, which is the axis of the body, is it? Because, I repeat, the upper and lower vertebrae should also have been worn out when, of course, when a person rides a horse, for example, for a long time, the last lumbar vertebra is worn out with the first sacral vertebra in the anterior part. It becomes like a rounded lip between the two due to the movement of riding a horse. Well, women in those days spent a lot of time on their knees working in the stone mortars, grinding flour, washing in the rivers, while the man went hunting or sowing or wandering. Because it is said that men were much lazier in all of America than women, that women worked much harder than men. That's proven, isn't it? In other words, he was already, let's say, Kanchereaba, the things of the come on, the man for him.
Future has not been taken away from us yet, Doctor.
It has not gone away, and I believe it is getting worse. In other words, we make use of that to pursue this way. Well, then all that made a deformation of the woman's body. As the woman was in that position of the spine, in the case of Maria in particular, it meant that her spine could not be stretched because it was bent, because the vertebrae was a wedge forward, 2009, and that then, for me, that Maria has walked with some forward hypostasis. Add to that the tridactyly of the feet. She will have suffered enough to walk, at least compared to what I can walk. So, I tell you a little story. 8 million years ago, there was a monkey that was found in the Tuscany area in Europe, one tall, which was called, very famous, it was called Oreopithecus bamboli, which was a monkey that has nothing to do with the Euson. But at the time, they saw so many things on his skeleton that he appeared in a coal mine and he was half petrified in the coal. Well, they found so many similarities with the human being that even John the 23rd, the Pope, was interested in him, believing him to be an ancestor of ours. And why did you become interested in that? Because it had a vertebra similar to the one Mary had, but upside down. Instead of having a more worn front side like Maria, she had a worn backside. In other words, it was a wedge placed the other way around from Maria. And what did he do? It made him stand upright, completely straight, and he had no choice but to walk on two legs. But not because it had the bibitation of a man, but because that wedge forced it to be unable to bend forward. Can you see it? So these are phenomena that have already been seen. Don't come to tell me strange things. Don't come to tell me, well, everyone sees what they can. I hope to see more every day. But I have arguments to tell these things so that the people who listen, well, think that what we are seeing are things that have already happened. So that would be another example. But Montserrat did not. Montserrat walked straight. Another thing, if Maria has had a harder life, because surely she has had a harder life when the woman is kneeling. the traction of the muscles on the legs, on the femur, on the tibia, on the fibula. Remember that the muscles are inserted in the bones by improntas, not only tendons, but improntas, which are roughnesses of the bone itself, where the muscles are glued. There in the tendons, in the non-contractile part of the muscle, but in the ends, in the aponeurosis and all that, support tissue which makes the muscle adhere to the bone. So in those positions, and when lifting, imagine when lifting the portable stone mortars of that time, I have mortars of that time, that Zweitosendane that I found in my research, and when I want to lift them, they weigh 50 kilograms. Well, I don't give them a step with that by raising it. And these women would put it under their shoulder, under their arm, and walk. Well, all this causes an increase in the roughness of the bone, because the muscle is so tightened on the bone that it makes the union with the bone more solid so that it can withstand the weights. In addition, bones twist throughout life and rotate and deform. And yet I don't see it in Maria, but I don't see it in Montserrat either. That's another thing that catches my attention, the bones of Montserrat. I don't see a bone that has been, shall we say, tractioned by work of that kind. Do they realize it? In other words, there is a mixture of yes and no within the bodies. So since I cannot find known medical arguments, well, I start looking for another argument, and I say, well, we still think that there is a genetic anarchy here because they were found in that precession period, which for me would be the seat, one of the circles of the earth, and everything I talked about before, where, well, in time, what happened, I don't know, but different genes were found, and this was done, and, well, the result was this one, an anarchy before involution.
Okay, very good. I wanted to ask you about Yusan before you go on with that, just so you can continue. There is a scientist who says that he discovered 5 tendons and that there are, yes, two fingers were removed because after the bodies were dead, and that this was discovered in Mary specifically. Did you see any indication of that with what you saw of Mary?
I have to honestly say that I did not look for that topic. Isn't it true? There you have to talk a little, because if you have eaten dinner, if you have cut a finger and the tendon remains, well, logically there is a tendon 1 muscle that no longer work, so they are extra. And there we can say, well, if there is the muscle, there has also been the moving limb. Now we will have to see that. The easiest thing to do, which I don't know if they are going to want to do, would be to do a dissection and see if the tendon is there and if the muscle is there and where it goes. And it can also be that this phenomenon occurs over a long period of time in the genetic evolution of all this. And the muscle and the tendon are absorbing, retracting, atrophying. Well, I don't want to talk about something I didn't see because we are talking vice versa. I prefer to save the words for when it pays off. That reminds me of one thing. I saw the film where Yusan, Mr. Akirika, is watching a fluoroscopy of those big hands. And a doctor specialized in hands is talking and says that for him, although maybe what I understood was that maybe if the carbon-14 gave a greater antiquity, for him they would be more modern hands because they maintain certain tendons, certain soft parts, that they have to disappear by the time they are older. I understood something like that. Therefore, he believed that the hands could be more modern in terms of that. Well, with respect to that, what I started to think about is to reason on my part. And I said, let's see, without endorsing or criticizing what the other doctor says, because I have to for medical ethics and respect, but the soft parts remain in the body and more about the bones according to the types of burial that there are, according to how the earth is, not only the weather, but the type of burial, the right place that they call it in forensic medicine, isn't it? Where they were buried, under what circumstances. And here the famous diatom comes into play, because diatom, which is a marine fossil of phytoplankton from the Cretaceous period, very old, well, then the sediments have left this dust that over time solidifies and forms large rocks, isn't it? Now if you grind them, they come back to obtain the Zweitosendine diatomaceous earth powder. If I see that, I have to say, for example, analyze that in Nazca, for me that is born on the surface, that, hey, I understand, if I am not mistaken, that it belongs to the final Quaternary era, that is to say, to the Pleistocene, that the Pleistocene is before 100,000 years. At 10,000 years in the Americas, south more or less varies a little bit. At 100,000 years, it changes to the Holocene, which is the current terrain, and backwards more than 12,000 years, comes what is called the end of the Quaternary era, which is the end of the Quaternary era. It is the Pleistocene in the final part and before the Miocene and all that stuff. Well, but then we have to see if in Nazca, in the cave where it is said that they were found, they were placed alone, and then you sand a pocket of diatom that remained from the Cretaceous suspended somewhere, was covering it. It was shelled and it was covering everything. Or if the diatom was shelled or brought from somewhere else and was covered, let's say intentionally. And here we have to make a differentiation. The case that they are covered by the effect of nature gives us what is called post-depositional processes, which are natural processes in that case, where a tsunami, a sea, or an earthquake, or a drought, or a wind are covering a biological element, and let's say they provide protection from the natural point of view. These processes are called post-depositional, after deposition of something of natural origin. But there are other processes that are post-depositional cultural processes, which are, let's say, another index that I invented, let's say so, isn't it? And that I invented it out of necessity, and I explain why. When I was doing stratigraphy, which is a very complex technique, more so for doctors, isn't it? It is difficult to study the geological layers where a human bone is deposited and from there to see how old it is, to date it even relatively, to see when it died. I found that those that were in the layer close to the Holocene, that is to say the most fertile layer that exists now, were often covered with elements, let's say debris and elements that people had thrown on top to cover them more, or to deposit, to throw garbage, and a series of other things. So when I dated them, it gave me wrong because it did not give me a natural dating, but more the use and garbage gave me an adaptation that was not real for me, the antiquity of when the person died. Then I had to divide. I made the contemporary superficial layer of Piotr, which I named that layer of contemporary garbage that the human being throws now, and that increases the thickness of the most superficial layer on which we walk, which is called Holocene at present. Then I made a division of the two layers, and that gave me the dates again, more or less relatively well. Then returning to Nazca, if here the layer was put on these mummies and it was covered naturally, it is one thing. And if they were covered artificially, that is to say culturally, we go to the contemporary superficial layer of the Piotti, which would be in this case the diatom which covered all these Nazca mummies, but so that they last until now on the surface of the body. Surely below they have put a substrate of glue that adheres with something to the body of the mummies. So all of that is going to alter, and it varies what this doctor says that they would be more modern hands or not, because you have to analyze all those things, because already the soft parts in the diatomy are going to be preserved more, and then what would be preserved according to what the A in the hand, little time in the soft parts in the hand, then it would be more modern. In this case, it may lengthen the duration time of the soft parts because use and the diatomy and the substrate have allowed it to dry more and stick more to the bony part and maintain itself. So that's where I'm going. I'm starting to see that I don't know if I can really think that because it has soft parts, it's more modern or not. And another thing, already speculating a little finer, if really the hand, this White House and Dine, have soft parts that are more modern and not so old, because if not disappear the soft parts that do in Nazca with a carbon-14 of 1,000 years old, it means that they have taken them from the future backwards to a more ancient time, to a hand that is of less antiquity. So I am getting closer to what I said myself, that these people came from the future and not from the past, as I thought.
Yes.
So I say this not to argue with anyone or anything, because I am not capable of doing that. But I look for arguments, and they fit me again, the arguments that I so far in the research.
Okay, very good. He told me he was going to show me the angles he makes of the 60 centimeters heads.
I don't, that I have them, I think I passed on to some of you.
Yes.
If I can read something to you, I have to read it to you, because I forget the numbers, right?
Okay, very good.
Look, let's see.
Shall I show you the images you sent me while you read?
No, but first I want to tell you something else that talks about this tridactyl and these things. The human capacity to adapt to all this must also be taken into account, because let's remember that some people are born without hands due to a genetic deficiency, right? or some drug eusen, or people who have an accident and cut their hand or cut their fingers and things like that. We all know that the person who was born without the development, for example, of the fingers of the hand, often makes up with another part of the body what he lacks. Thus we see that there are painters without hands, for example, who make great paintings with their mouths, taking the brush with their mouths or with their feet. Well, then, and much more. Well, it costs more to adapt if the person has had an accident and has lost fingers, but they also adapt. What does this mean? This means reawakening dormant genes. And that's the great capacity it has, survival of the human species. Notice that when a person has that incapacity that I tell you from the labor point of view, what do you do if he is unable to work because of the lack of hand? A disability is made, which is called revaluation of all the usefulness that remains to man after losing his hand. A new 100% of human capacity is taken, and then that man goes back to work, let's assume with a disability. That is why there is the law for the disabled, which I believe everyone has, where human capacity is revalued once again. And this human capacity is not only revalued to work, to have a normal life, it is revalued because it is recognized that the human species has the capacity to awaken dormant genes in the face of adversity. So that is what is happening here in these phenomena of the Nazca beings. For me, due to the situation at the time they appear, precisely because of the evolution they are going through, they are awakening dormant genes that belong to the chimpanzee, the monkey, the previous being, and Homo sapiens. So there has been no genetic manipulation, as I said before, in Nazca at that time, wanting to make hybrid people based on monkey genes.
It is, as you say, that it was a natural thing. Of course, natural species mix.
For example, I don't know if I said it the other time, and if I did, excuse me, but did Darwin see the finches? We talked about finches the other time.
No.
Well, when Darwin studies in the Galapagos, he goes to study the fauna, flora. Well, he finds that on one island there were finches, a bird that had a long beak that adapted to the type of food, that had to use a long beak to get the food. But on the other island there was another one with the same pinson, but it had a blunt, short beak, which was adapted to break the food of the other island. In other words, a bird from one island did not go to another island, but remained separate, and each one adapted its structure to survive. Well, that's taking out the differences. Well, there's genetic behavior, and Darwin already said it in that thing. Well, so that's like one more example of, so that we don't freak out about tridactyly, that we don't freak out so much about capabilities. Man has a potential capacity for adaptation that is fabulous, but that also leads him to evolve and leads him to finally finish his things. As we said, that evolution is not only for the good, but it is to change to another species. Well, then let's see what, if you want, let him put the images while he reads. Well, how? There it is. Well, this famous class polygon is an ancient craniometry polygon. In the man has from the left, it goes from the gravel above, from the forehead to the back of the skull, where the longest part of the skull is located. No change to another. It is different, this better, no? Well, then each of the four of us, points means gravel on the left, to the left of me, isn't it? Above the nose, let's say, and then the most posterior at the back on the occipital would be the most protruding part of the skull, which may coincide with opistocranium, or it may coincide with the external occipital protuberance or not, or according to the skull shape and all that, or can almost match the lambda 2009. The other point further up the head in the cranial vault coincides with the bregma, which is the union of the frontal, from the frontal suture to the sagittal suture of the parietals. Many times it is taken 2 centimeters further back from that point in man. And the one below, which is in the neck, let's say, would be the Bayesian point, or Bayesian, which is in the occipital foramen or foramen magnum, is the point. Anterior border, the anterior border of the occipital foramen, well, that would be the other benchmark. Then the polygon is made, and then the skull is divided into 4 parts. In this case, it can be divided into more as to whether there is a need or no. That was used in the old days. To see, look, at that time, they wanted to see how the skull was growing from monkey to man. So each quadrant was divided into 4 parts. How the frontal part, the occipital or upper part, the lower or anterior part, which would be the hypophysis, and the lower part, was growing. Posterior, which would be that of the cerebellum. In this case, we find that to see why the ostentation imprudent I go it, to name as I put the name forehead quadrant. Of course, the forehead triangle is very small, which shows that there is a little development of the lobe. Frontal, with all that means in terms of feelings, and so in thought like us, isn't it? Well, that's why I say that instead of thinking, instead of feeling a lot, look, I say the one that follows further back is here, the cranial vault, the triangle that follows after the other. Let's say that it is the one that is more developed in it, that is more development of all kinds of brain potential development, isn't it? Notice that if I compare it with the case of Montserrat and Maria, Montserrat, for example, has the anterior part of the class polygon that represents a low skull, an ipsi skull, a low skull, but the posterior part is a high skull. That is, it is a skull that has two components that are not normally found together in the human skull. In this case, it looks the same. The top of the skull pump has grown very much backwards. Well, then we have the lower back of the neck to the back. That triangle shows that there is a sense of possibly the cerebellum very well developed there in your part, isn't there? Also the pineal gland system, the interhemispheric system, all the special ideations of the brain. And the lower anterior triangle tells us about a large amplitude, so that there is a hormonal activity given by the well-developed pituitary gland as well, okay? Well, that is my handwriting, that I put class polygon, and I am saying at the top less, more, according to how it has been developing. The least developed part is at the front, okay? But remember that the front part is not developed, but towards the sides of this being, it grows towards the sides. And for me, and I have not been able to see it because I have to see it personally, I think that the zygomatic fossa here on the sides disappears, but let's say that it dilates outwards to give more cavity to the frontal area. That is, we must also think that it grows to the sides a little bit. Is there a cranial suture in man that is the pterion, which I think that in this being, if it has grown to the sides, I want to speculate that in one of those cases it does not have it. That cranial suture does not exist, okay?
This one, all right, this one up here that says because this is the clash polygon, right? But here in this other image, which I didn't get to read, what does it say up here in your notes?
I brought them that well.
Or what do these lines that are drawn with numbers mean?
Well, the one at the bottom, the one at the top is to see, let's say, the growth of the skull, which is the gravelly shape of the most protruding part of the skull. The one that is vertical is, let's say, the height, to see if it is camesocephalic, brachycephalic, non-camesocephalic, or the height of the cranial vault. And the one below is the famous Frankfurt plane, which the Frankfurt plane, as it has no external ear hole, I speculate on putting it where the inner ear is, isn't it? And passing through the inferior border of the orbit of the eye socket. So that is to delimit a little bit the Frankfurt plane, which you can see that there is, if one assumes that he is in an apparently stationary position. Frank Fry's plane is practically quite horizontal. Well, one can speculate how this individual would do standing up, can't one?
And now can you help us understand this other image?
Yes, that has a series of that more complicated. Wait, I think I'm going to write something down here. Riker's angle, that 92-degree angle, okay? That goes from the lambda L, up says with Green says lambda, then continues down with the external occipital protuberance, and then down use and toward the foramen magnum, the posterior part. There the foramen would be posterior. Well, in this individual, it gave me, in both of them, it gave me 92 and 90 degrees of the angle there, the angle where the angle is marked like this angle goes down in graduation. Here I notice it, because if I don't forget, the angle of 92 degrees goes down as the growth increases of the skull in the occipital part. In other words, the more cranial surface area the occipital has, the more the angle decreases. And I did this because of the following, because I compared with skulls of Tehuelche origin from the Argentinian Patagonia, where they have an angle of 123 degrees more or less, and where in spite of the fact that they made cranial deformations with headbands, they did not change. So in this case, there is no cranial deformation of anything. But let's say that it has been evolving, that is, as the skull has grown more towards modernism. Let's say that the angle of 92 degrees has been getting smaller.
How is ours? What is your grade?
And it is a little bit more between a little bit less than the Patagonians, 123 degrees. I didn't bring that here because I had noticed that in the book. You know all those things, right?
Okay, so I understand why you say these are from the future because this one is even smaller. It reaches 92 degrees.
Of course. And I am going to tell you that this individual we are seeing now, the ostento improved, has an evolved skull, one evolved face, even if we do not like it. First, for these angles that I show you, isn't it? Secondly, let's see, there is another one. I don't read it well. Well, but before I forget, if we go from the back to the front to the face, and I don't have it here, I haven't sent it to you, but I can get the plan and the angles from Camper, which is called. This is the origin of the lateral standard of Camper, who was the one who invented to analyze the skull in profile, who was a Camper scientist of Broca's time. Well, that angle of Camper and Camper planos dona iusant, tracing a vertical between the individual's eyebrow, nose, and chin of the person, gives us that in man it is always smaller. Comparing it to a horizontal Camper plane, it gives us an angle of less than 90 degrees in man. And as we move towards the more anterior Pittacus, we get smaller. That angle becomes sharper. So what do the classics have to say about this? They say that this Camper angle, the Camper shot, is to show the beauty of the person's face. And that is a concept that dates back to 1850. Maybe beauty at that time was one way, and now it has changed or not according to the taste of society. Let him use it, but I want to say the following in these beings, the Tento and Prude. This one that we are seeing gives me more than 90 degrees to me. That is to say that it gives me a skull that escapes the beauty of the human face, but that is more evolved. In other words, it is an uglier skull, an uglier face, but it evolves more than 90 degrees. In other words, we are in the presence of an evolved face, and it is in accordance with an evolved skull. I tell you this so that you can see precisely what is striking. The concept of beauty that is made when studying the body of human evolution. The man always has a beauty that is indicated by a Camper plane of less than 90 degrees, and in this case passes 90 degrees. From there arose a series of discussions of the famous golden method, the golden number of the species, and all those things in which many artists wanted to reach perfection by drawing the human body. And we know that the human body is not perfect, asymmetrical.
According to what you are telling me, I would like to ask you a question that came to my mind just now. You see, the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis came out, and in more of 1,2000 years ago, there were cataclysms, and this was the Ice Age. I wanted to ask you if you think it is possible that beings like these could have evolved before these cataclysms to this point. And when the cataclysms happened, they could have gone subway to protect themselves and then come out again, because apparently they are our evolutionary descendants. But I wanted to ask you if you believe that this could have been possible, that this phenomenon has occurred, and that is why it seems that they are from the future. But really, before these cataclysms, they could have reached this evolutionary point. And when these cataclysms happened, they went subway. Do you believe that this could have been possible?
Well, before I forget, I answer this first. What you said, I ask you a question. I will answer the other. You realize because I said in Mexico that they were from the future and not from the past, that what I am saying is not true. Well, now I'll answer the other thing. I don't think so. Always wielding my modest theory. I don't think that happened because it seems to me that there should have been. I can't know if there is any record of any of this happening because in one of these cases it did happen. But according to the methods I use, I don't think it has happened. For me, there has been this genetic phenomenon in Nazca that happened in that area. And I explained why the previous being and all those things. Well, but I don't think these people have, shall we say, taken refuge under the ground after the glaciation. And then what happened? Did they die and stay there? No, I don't think so. I'd better have more background in the world of fossils and all those kinds of situations. I don't know. I don't want to talk anymore because I could be wrong. Because everything you ask me is very logical and worth studying, isn't it? But at least from what I am modestly seeing and what I am handling within my ignorance of everything, I am inclined to think of another type of cause of what happened at that moment there. And that crypto beings living, I don't know, I can't say anything about that yet. I go to the genetic part of the evolutionary part. You should know that it happens to me that I go back and forth to make all these measurements that you show me and that we talked about. When I have some time, I check them again, and what do I know? Because sometimes one's head turns and one says, well, but I'd do it again, and everything gives me the impression that there is a logic which does not exist in science, but that there is a logic, call it scientific, where everything is chained. Everything is like one thing follows another, and that it would not be so difficult to think of things as I try to put them.
All right. Okay. I think we're pretty clear so far. Let me know if you want to add anything else before we close the discussion.
Well, I want to show you a little bit of why I brought the bones here so that people who listen, if you can get the image you have from the x-ray, ready? This is a humerus, okay, very old. Here would be the humeral head shoulder, and here is the olecranian perforation. There is the olecranian fossa, but it is perforated. This was characteristic of the Pitecos, which is inherited mostly by women in proportion. That is the subject of my thesis. Why? Because here we have the forearm, the ulna with the olecranian, and it articulates like this.
Okay.
And that would be the elbow. So it's hard for me to focus on me. That would be the elbow. So in the monkey, when he stopped walking, the gorilla stops walking on two legs and falls forward, leans on his arms, and the arms have to lock the olecranon in the olecranon fossa, which is perforated and makes an extremely strong elbow. Well, this was in the woman. This is the inheritance of the monkey to the woman. The previous being for me has had this other type of humerus where the olecranus fossa is, but it is not perforated. So when the elbow enters here, the olecranon enters, but it reaches a certain point and stops. So I propose to all the people who listen to me, look in your family, women, or look in movies, or look, do you know where I have seen them? In those mixed martial arts tournaments where they fight women and they do shots and they do wrestling shots and all that. Many times to the woman, let's see, I put myself so that we can, when we stretch, the arm does not remain horizontal, but this part goes further.
I've seen it. I know mixed martial arts well. I write about it, so I know perfectly well what you are talking about.
And there are women who, especially those who are thin, who have little muscle development, when they stretch their arm, the arm does not remain horizontal. The forearm falls and remains as if broken backwards, downwards. There are some that show it well. Well, that's because he has the olecranian perforation in the skull fossa, like Autolopithecus inherited from him. The inheritance of the lack of perforation is contributed by that previous being that I tell you. And those were my thesis proposals to try to explain all these things. When a man stretches his arm, usually he does not even reach. If he has a lot of muscle, he does not even reach the horizontal of the whole arm, but he remains a little more semi-flexed, a little more acute angle. Well, that's the way to look at this kind of thing. And what I didn't bring, because I have it in a glass box and it was too big to bring, well, that goes along with the hypovasal sacral type of the monkey and hyperbasal, which is larger from the anterior being. So, well, these are elements that one uses, that when I did my thesis, I did not imagine that I had ended up using them in these things, but that served me to have arguments to think what I always said. And I'm honest with you that sometimes I say, no, I am going to make an effort. I'm going to erase everything, start again, and I want hopefully to reach a conclusion that is similar to what the others say, and I get the same ones. So, well, that is why I humbly offer them what I have achieved. But to me, all the links and all the gears of the human species fit together to end up in these beings that I repeat what I've already said before, that, well, I repeat it again. They are for me. They are the ones that have to be born in the future when our species disappears.
We are talking about science fiction, Master. We are talking about science fiction.
Well, but here's the proof, the science fiction pointer. When one starts to measure things, I am very reluctant to believe things. In fact, I have been very argumentative and I have closed myself many times. And if I don't find, when I go out on a bush expedition, if I don't find such a thing, there is no such thing. And well, but then I start to zoom in and subtract and do this and measure. What do I know? And I'm sure that at first I was even embarrassed to say, look what he achieved. No, but I can't say this because they will run me out of here. So it may seem like science fiction or not. I'm not from science fiction, nothing. I try to transmit what one manages to see. I found this, well, how does it look? Well, let's see how it looks, trying to measure to turn someone else's opinion and so on. So get the llama head proteins right and then we'll talk. Or at least make a theory or a scientific presentation as it has to be that has validity. And you have to add a lot of other things because someone else may say, yes, at that time they used to fill the skull cavity of these beings with llama fat because they wanted to preserve it more. So maybe they put the llama fat inside and they stayed inside. Another one is going to come out and say that kind of thing. And that's as far as we're going to go. So, well, since you are asking for a final conclusion, well, here is my conclusion.
Very well. Thank you very much, Doctor.
I am very grateful for the accessibility you have to present these things, because it is necessary that everyone and hopefully other people also do the same to build the steps, those scientists that are needed in the world.
Yes, it is not easy because they are delicate issues that change paradigms and that all people always resist. And that is why I'm trying to do it. Maybe I am not a scientific person and I was created by doctors. My mother and my father, both of them are doctors too. And maybe I learned some things about language from them. That's why maybe I became a communicologist. But we are making an attempt, and I believe that talking to specialists such as yourself will bring us a little closer to being able to agree above all, which is what matters, because fighting as the world is now is not convenient. It is not convenient. We have to get to the same page. If not, imagine.
There are many things to talk about and many things to follow. And this is not easily solved, not so soon. Perhaps generations will go by, perhaps the sculpture will have to change, and man will have to prove that he is good for something else, won't he? And review the whole life of man, the life of the earth, and then maybe we can come up with something new. Hopefully we will be able to see it, and if not, well, that someday they find out that you and I talk, and that we talk a lot of weird things, and that they seem weird, but they are not weird because they are here, aren't they? In this bone and things like that. Well, at least to have contributed something.
Yes.
Only scientific data?
Very well. Thank you very much for yet another talk. I hope we will do another one. As more of this comes out, we are also trying to put together a team of scientists to go there to Peru so that they can investigate these bodies in person. We are trying to get funding for this, and you are one of the people we want to have there. So we will let you know how the whole thing is going, because it is not going to be easy to do all the politics and everything that has to be done. But I will warn you that it is an effort that we are going to try to make, and that we want you to be there.
Thank you very much. You can count on me for the possibility that they may occur. What more, I do want to go to Peru to visit the place of the event. Is fabulous. We will draw many conclusions by seeing the place and clarifying many things. Well, thank you very much. Well, as far as I can, I will gladly collaborate with you.
Very well. Thank you very much.
I appreciate what you have told me. This one, I value it. I did not expect it, but I value it more than what you have just told me.
Yes, well, I think it is the logical thing to do, because you have been the clearest and most open people on the subject. And I think that if anyone deserves it, it is people like you, people like Dr. Salsa. Dr. Salsa has already gone there, but I believe that what you found is, for me, the most important thing in terms of changing paradigms. And I think we have to keep digging into this. It's not over, it's just begun.
No, it is only the first half of the first sheet. Yes, there is a long way to go. Well, I thank you very much for what you have just told me, and, well, I will try to do my best.
Very well, Master. Doctor, let's hope to see you soon. Let's keep in touch, and thank you very much. See you next time, shall we? I'm going to stop recording now.
Yes, sir. I thank you very much. Much greetings, and who of good.
Thank you very much.